Senator Cruz, on Wednesday night you said that you regretted your support of John Roberts' confirmation to the Supreme Court. We all know it can be difficult to identify and appoint judges to that court, and so one of your proposals is to have judicial retention elections as a check on those permanent appointments. Wouldn't an idea like this politicize the judiciary? Wouldn't it make them unlikely to go against majoritarian impulses?
Oh, listen, I wish it were the case that we didn't need fundamental reform of the court. If the justices were doing their jobs, if they were following the law, you wouldn't need fundamental reform, something like judicial election. But if you have judges behaving like politicians, making policy decisions that they have no authority under the Constitution to do, then they cannot expect to be exempt from the authority of we the people. And Michael, let me expand on this point as well, because this is a great illustration. Think about the debate this week in California. If you asked all 11 candidates, what kind of judges will you appoint to the court? Every one of them would stand up and say, I will appoint strict constructionists who won't legislate from the bench. They'll say that word for word. Those are the talking points every one of their campaigns has given them. Every Republican has said that for 40 years. Let's look at the record. You know, Democrats have batted almost 1,000 when it comes to Supreme Court nominees. Every Supreme Court nominee they put forward votes like a radical leftist nutcase. Republicans, we bat about 500. About half of Republican Supreme Court justices actually honor their oaths and defend the Constitution. The other half are screaming train wreck disasters. Earl Warren was a Republican nominee. Bill Brent was a Republican nominee. If you remember the old Pogo cartoon, we have met the enemy, and they is us. It's important to understand how that happens. I mentioned in the debate 2 moments in time that were particularly important. Number one, in 1990, George Herbert Walker Bush had in one room David Souter, and in another room, Edith Jones, the rock-ribbed conservative on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. George Herbert Walker Bush picked David Souter. Fast forward 15 years to 2005, George W. Bush had in one room John Roberts. And in another room, my former boss, Mike Ludig, the rock-ribbed conservative on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, a man who was Justice Scalia's very first law clerk. George W. Bush picked John Roberts. Now, it's worth understanding why they did it. It's not that they were secretly desiring, I want some big government liberal. It's that both David Souter and John Roberts, they didn't have a paper trail. They'd lived their whole lives, they've never written or said anything to prove they were a conservative, and both President Bushes said, gosh, if we nominate a conservative, we'll have a fight. The Democrats will oppose us, the media will criticize us, and Republicans will get nervous. So let's nominate someone who's never said or done anything to prove they're a conservative. Every time we do that, we get burned.
Senator Cruz,
and I'm going to suggest to you the difference between me and the other very, very fine men and women who are running for president is when push comes to shove, when it comes to the moment to make the decision, whether it is really taking on Obamacare, whether it is standing up to amnesty, whether it is actually defunding Planned Parenthood, or whether it is standing up and putting a principled conservative jurist on the Supreme Court, the difference between me and the other candidates is that I'm going to do what I told you I would do.
Senator Cruz, would it be fair to characterize your position then that because the left has politicized the American judiciary, we should respond in kind? And isn't that throwing in the towel on a pretty important part of the constitutional separation of powers in this country?
Michael, let's be clear. We shouldn't politicize the judiciary. Let me give an example. I'll give an example of a policy matter I care passionately about. School choice. School choice is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. We ought to be willing to fight and to go into every African American community, every Hispanic community, and say every child in America has a right to a quality education regardless of race, ethnicity, wealth, or zip code. Now, Michael, I've fought for that as a United States Senator. If I'm president, we have never seen a president fight for school choice the way that I will. But let me be perfectly clear. No Supreme Court should issue a ruling demanding school choice in every school in America. I agree with that policy position, but the place to advance that policy position is in the elected legislatures that are accountable to the people. No, our judges shouldn't be political. They should follow the Constitution.